This is Jay's 40,000 mile original. It's a 1997 Toyota Supra. It's a twin turbo automatic. It is immaculate as far as condition goes. The seats look like they really haven't even been sat in that much. The exterior of the car is in really nice shape. But he didn't like the automatic, so he brought it to me. And as you can see here, we're going to be putting this GR700 kit in the car. Jay opted for the Clutchmasters FX850 kit. So that's what's going to be going in the car. It should make for a fun car. Jay has bigger plans eventually for it. Right now it's totally stock. I'll be putting an ETS intercooler kit on it as well. But eventually he plans on doing a full build on this car. So it will be a ripper once it's all done. So keep an eye on my page and I'll be updating the progress on this car as we go. The first thing we're going to do here is we're going to remove this entire center console assembly as well as the shifter assembly. So go ahead and take off this the center console cover, which just pops off. Just be careful with it, you don't want to break it. And then you're going to take all the Phillips head screws out all the way back and even under this cover, and you're going to pull this whole entire center console off so that you have room to work. Okay, now you can see that I have the entire center console removed, and I also removed the 4 10mm bolts that hold this shifter into place. Now there is a lever that goes down underneath the car, so you can't remove this entire thing yet. We're gonna have to get under the car first. Also, I unplugged all my stock wiring from this. So this is done now. We're in the car for now. We're gonna get underneath the car and we're gonna remove that lever so we can pull this out, and then I'll show you how we're going to modify the actual tunnel to fit the new shifter. Our next step with the car is gonna be to remove this stock exhaust. We're going to remove the stock drive shaft, and then we're going to start working on removing this stock auto trans. We're going to show you up here. This is the lever that I was talking about that's going up to the shift assembly. So we're going to take that bolt off, and then we can pull that shifter up out and get it out of the way. But we need to get this exhaust off anyway to get to the trans, and then also we're going to loosen up some things on the motor, like the radiator brackets, so that the motor can lean back without having any interference. So I'm going to go ahead and do all that, get it prepped so that we can start leaning the transmission back. So just remove everything like the O2 sensor, the full exhaust, all the way up to the where the cat is. So you're going to remove from here all the way back. After you get the exhaust removed, the next step is going to be to get this shift lever removed so that you can get the drive shaft and be able to spin it. So what you're going to do is remove that bolt, and then you can move this lever and get it into the neutral position. And then that way you can turn the drive shaft to get those bolts out there and these bolts out back here. All right, now the next step is going to be to remove the drive shaft, which I already did. You can see it's gone. Take out that shifter, and then you're going to drain the fluid from your automatic trans. And then over here on this side, there's trans lines. Then we're going to need to remove those. What I did is I removed all the bolts, so they're all loose up here, up to the front, and you can see here that this trans line here is loose. Sorry, it's a little bit hard to show here and there. That trans line is loose, and then those trans lines go into this radiator here to 2 fittings, and I just ran a hose from one side to the other to block that off. There's not going to be any pressure there. So you just need to make sure it's sealed off. You don't want any dirt get in there or anything like that. So then now we're going to go ahead and pull these lines back out, and then we're going to be ready to remove the transmission. On the top side of the motor, you're going to want to do a couple things to get this thing ready to lean back so that the trans can pull out. One is disconnect the battery. 2 is remove the radiator brackets so that the radiator can come back with the motor if it needs to. And then also the trans dipstick tube there, the red guy. It's a 10mm bolt on there. You're going to want to remove that so that the dipstick can come out with the trans. Okay, now that the dipstick's out, I actually went ahead and I started to lean the transmission back, and I removed those 4 crossmember bolts, and you can see here I got about 3.5 inches here of lean, and you just want to let it down slowly and just listen up in the engine bay, make sure nothing's getting crunched, make sure the fan is okay. You can see here the fan still spins okay, so we're good. Just be careful with this part. I want you to take your time and just make sure everything is There's nothing get pinched, no wires are going to get crimped or snipped or pulled too hard. So right now we're going to go ahead and remove all the wiring off the trans, and then I'm going to start removing those bell housing bolts that you see up there. Alright, so now I have all of the bolts removed from the bell housing, so the trans is free except for the torque converter, which is located in here where you can't see. And what you're going to do is you're going to remove this rubber seal from this front pocket, and inside of here there's going to be 17mm bolts that hold the torque converter to the flex plate. So what you're going to do is you're going to get on here with a short socket, 17mm socket, and then you're going to go ahead and loosen those up. And what you have to do to rotate this so that you can get to the next bolt, because you have to rotate the flex plate around so you get to the next bolt, is you're going to put a breaker bar on the crank. So you need a breaker bar and a 22mm socket. Now only rotate the motor clockwise, very important. Do not rotate the motor counterclockwise. So you're going to rotate it clockwise until you get to the next bolt. And then you're going to go ahead and remove that bolt, and then just repeat the process until you have all the flex plate bolts out, and then you should be able to drop the transmission out of the car. Okay, so there you can see my 6 torque converter bolts, and you can see here I started to shimmy the transmission back off, so now you can see the torque converter sitting in there, and we're free from the flex plate. And now all I need to do is just make sure that all my wiring is free, which I see one bolt there that I need to remove. I just want to make sure all the wiring is free, and then I can go ahead and drop the transmission down out of the car, and then we can start getting ready to remove the flex plate, and then we'll move on to actually modifying the tunnel to fit the T56 Magnum. Alright, now the trans is dropped out and we can see the flex plate, and we're going to want to go ahead and remove these 8 bolts. You're going to want to use an impact gun on these to get them out. So go ahead and remove the flex plate, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so the next step in our install here is going to be to modify the tunnel. And you can see I actually already did this. And what we're going to do is you're actually going to cut out the front here of the tunnel so that there's room for the shifter to work. And then I have a tunnel cover that we'll put over top on the inside here, and then we'll seal it up with seam seal it, and it'll be like a factory install. So what you see here is a template, and this template is out on my website, and you can download it. But this gives you the general shape. This is just a cardboard cutout that I made, but I'll turn it into a template that you can print out and use. And here you can see the tunnel after it's cut. And I will next show you how to install the actual tunnel cover. This is my tunnel cover, and it's a fabricated piece I do here in-house, and it actually bolts into the car using the 4 factory bolt holes, so you don't have to be drilling or doing anything crazy like that. And it has a nice rubber boot with a seal plate that keeps everything sealed off, so all the outside environment elements are sealed out. And all we're going to do is we're going to place this in the car, we're going to bolt it in, and then we're going to put some seam sealant around the edges. You can buy this piece through my website as well, and I feel like it's like the key component to doing one of these auto to manual swaps. Okay, so here we are in the car looking where the tunnel has been trimmed out, and when you trim this out you're going to use just either a cutoff wheel, or if you're brave you could probably use a plasma cutter here in the car. But personally what I recommend is putting a towel over this entire area here to protect the inside elements. That's what I did. And then I just use a cutoff wheel on a grinder, and I just come in from the underside and grind this out after you put a mark on there using that template that I showed you. So now that everything's cut and we're ready to go, I'm going to install the actual tunnel cover, and it just slides in here. And what you're going to do is use the 2 rear bolt holes as well as the front 2 bolt holes. I lost one of my nuts here, but you can see here the 2 factory rear holes. So we're going to use some M6 bolts to fasten these 2 from the inside of the car, and then we're going to jump back under the car and we're going to install the 2 bolts from up under the underside. It's so tight in here, the only way to get to those is to use the underside to install the bolts. So I'll come back to that. Okay, now we're back under the car, and you can see that big scary hole that is cut out does not look so scary anymore, because now we have a nice cover protecting the inside of the car from all the outside elements. Now, when you go to install these bolts from the bottom side, you need to use these really tiny M6, and you should have 2 of these from when you remove the auto shifter. And you're just going to reach up in here and put them on each side. There's 2 of them, one here and one here. So go ahead, install those bolts, and then we'll come back and we'll seam seal. You're gonna put gloves on, and you're gonna put seam sealer on your finger, and then you're gonna work it around the inside edge all the way around here to seal that lip, just to make sure that no water or and the sound itself will be sealed out from the cabin. Okay, so now we're back under the car, and I have the tunnel installed. So the next step is to apply seam sealer. You can get this stuff at your local AutoZone in the bodywork section. I think it's like 12 bucks for a tube. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open the tube. I'm going to put some of this on my finger a little bit at a time. And then what I'm going to do is up here where the tunnel cover is installed, I'm going to go around the inner lip here and all around this edge and put seam sealer in and be generous with it all the way around until you complete the circle. And that's going to give you an airtight seal and liquid tight seal as well, all the way around the tunnel, and make this almost like a factory tunnel. Okay, so here you can see the seam sealing is all done all the way around. And what I'm gonna do now is I'm just gonna let this dry for about, I don't know, 6 hours or so. And then I'm gonna come back here and I'm gonna hit it with some spray paint just to make it look good. So let's take a peek here at this finalized cover install. So here it is in the car. You can see how well it fits. It's pretty tight down in there, but I have this set up so it fits in there perfectly. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do is install the flywheel. And here you can see I have this Clutchmasters flywheel installed. Now there is a little spacer plate that is behind the factory flex plate. You're not gonna use that. So pull that little spacer plate off, and then you're gonna bolt this flywheel directly up to the crank. Now you're gonna tighten these bolts down to about 75 foot-pounds, and you're gonna use red Loctite on those as well. Clutchmasters provides the 8 bolts. Here's one of them. They're about 1.5 inches long, roughly. So just Loctite the ends of the threads, go in opposite ends, 75, 75, 75, you know what I mean, just like a wheel. And that should be it for that. All right, my flywheel is all in and installed, so the next step is to install this pilot bearing. And the easiest way to do this is to find a socket that is similar in dimensions to the pilot bearing, and then you'll just smack on that socket with a hammer and get that in there until it's flush with the crank. So the next step is going to be to install the pressure plate and the disc assembly, and you can see here when it comes from Clutchmasters, each disc is wrapped up in paper, so you're going to disassemble it. Now make sure you keep everything in order so that you have the disc orientated the right way in relation to the crank. The disc each should say flywheel side and pressure plate side, so you should be able to orientate those even if you mix them up. But I just like to keep them in order, so as I disassemble them, I'll stack them in reverse order and then I'll stack them back up. So I'm going to go ahead and prep this and go ahead and set it up onto the flywheel, and I'll be back. All right, now you can see that I have my pressure plate installed and my clutch disc oriented the right way. You can see my little orange sticker in there that says pressure plate side. And then I have my alignment tool in there as well. Now one thing to keep in mind is these plastic alignment tools, sometimes they have play in them. Like you can see here, this has play. So what I try to do as I tighten down these pressure plate bolts is I try to kind of eyeball it and make sure it's kind of centered in there. Otherwise it's going to give you a lot of problems when you go to get the input shaft to go into the clutch here. So I just try to eyeball it and then I hold it there as I tighten these bolts. Now these pressure plate bolts, they take 24 foot-pounds, and I recommend Loctiting them as well. Okay, so now you can see my clutch install is complete, and if you look at the way the pressure plate sits against the flywheel, there's no gap here, and that's what you want. And when you were tightening these down, you should have been going around a quarter turn, quarter turn, quarter turn, quarter turn. That's what you want to do all the way around until you get to 24 foot-pounds on each one. So take your time with this, do it right, and then after you're done, inspect to make sure that your pressure plate is sitting against the flywheel properly. Okay, so we're back on Project Automatic to GR700 Supra, and the first thing we need to do is prep this transmission for install. So the first thing we need to do is take the shifter, and what we're going to do is seal around the inside edge around the bolts all the way around. You can do it, you can put the sealant right on here and then just sit the shifter down in place and then bolt it on. You should have 6 bolts from the factory shifter that you'll use. Then the second step is to modify this reverse lockout solenoid. There's 2 ways of doing it. You can use an electronic way of doing it with a switch, but the easiest way is just to take this off and modify the internal spring on it. I have another video out there on YouTube. Just search for T56 Magnum reverse lockout modification, and you should find that video on how to do that. It's really simple. It takes 5 minutes. Then the last step to get this thing ready to go is we just need to trim a little bit off of this front ear. And you can see here at about the, if you're looking at the front of the trans, it's at about the 230 position where I have this black line. We're going to take a cutoff wheel and just zip this corner off. That allows it to fit into the Supra tunnel without any modification. So those 3 things, it's only about a 20-minute total thing to do, and then this trans will be ready to go in. But we'll need to set up the throwout bearing distance, and that's what we're going to do after I wrap this up. Okay, so now my shifter is installed. My reverse lockout solenoid has been modified. The spring has been cut down, so it's easy to go into reverse. And I trimmed off this front corner of the bolt hole. So I got a little bit ambitious there with that hole, but it won't hurt anything. As long as you keep most of the flange there where the bolt can grab, it'll be fine. And then the last thing I forgot to mention is with my kits, it comes with these plugs for the speed sensor. These have a mechanical speed sensor for the old school cars, but we're not going to use that. So all my kits come with this plug. You're going to want to take this rubber piece out and install this plug. All right, so the first step to setting up our clutch hydraulic throwout bearing is going to be to install the actual throwout bearing itself onto the transmission. Now, when you get this kit from Clutch Masters, and this might vary from the different manufacturers of these bearings, but you want to remove the actual bearing itself assembly out of the hydraulic unit before you go ahead and attach it, because it's going to make it a lot easier. So from the back side of it, push this out, and then you can just set this aside for now. Now, this hydraulic bearing, you always want the lines to be oriented so that there's the top one, and they're both should be kind of pointing towards these 2 gaps over here in the bell housing or in the front case of the trans. So there's only 2 bolts that hold this in place. So you want those kind of pointing out there. Install it like that, because what you want is the feed line to come in the bottom fitting, and then the bleeder line is going to come out the top. That way you push all the air up and out of the system. So I'm going to go ahead and install this. I'm going to put a couple of shims on there for now, and I'll show you that here when we come back. Okay, so I have my hydraulic bearing installed now, and I actually Loctited these bolts just because I like them to be secure in case they would ever rattle out from vibration or whatever, since there is only 2 holding this in. And then here you can see the bearing itself, and you can see I installed all the shim pack in there for now. We'll probably be removing some of these shims to get our tolerance set right, and I'll get to that in a minute. But for now, just put all your shims on, put the bearing on. It should push on, it should snap in. You should feel it snap in with all those on there. So the next step is we're going to measure the depth with the bell housing installed on the trans. So I'm going to go ahead and put the bell housing itself up onto the trans. Now, one thing I want to mention is the bolt kit that I provide with the QuickTime bells. QuickTime provides a set of gold bolts, and they are not right for the T56 Magnum. When you go to try to put those gold bolts through the transmission into the bell, they're not long enough. You only get about half of the engagement inside the actual bell flange itself. So I highly recommend buying the bolt kit from me. If you don't want to buy the rest of the kit, I would recommend getting the bolts, or at least going out and buying the bolts from the hardware store, because that is one thing that is really crucial. Also, the block bolts that QuickTime provides, they don't even provide the proper bolts to go into the 2J block. So I provide the 5 proper fine thread bolts that are 12 millimeter. and then these smaller bolts for the bottom of the bell. So when you buy it from me, you pretty much get everything you need. You're not going to be running to the hardware store or anything like that. Okay, so the first step in getting our hydraulic bearing measurement set up properly is to measure from the face of our clutch to the fingers. And the reason we have to do that is because our pressure plate face is actually sticking out farther than our fingers. So we need to get this distance in here first, and then we'll measure from here out, and we'll subtract this inner measurement. So the first thing here, I'm gonna measure this out. And that is measuring at 9. And then I'm gonna measure here my inside, or my longer measurement, which will be from the block out to the face of my straight edge. And that is 73. So 73 minus 9 is 64 millimeters out to our fingers of our clutch. So now that we have our measurement from our block out to our clutch fingers, we need to set up our distance from our bell housing face back to our bearing. So we had 64 millimeters was our clutch face. So what we need to do is add 4 millimeters onto that, because that's what we want our gap to be between our bearing face and our clutch fingers. So 64 plus 4, we want to be at 68 millimeters back. So I'm going to take my straight edge, I'm going to measure back to what I have here, and I have all the shims installed, so I'll have to remove some, but right now we are at 61.5. So we're going to need to add up to 68, so we need to take 6.5 millimeters of shim out. So I'm going to go ahead and do that and come back, and then we'll look at the measurement again. Okay, so now I have shims removed. I'm going to take this measurement now, and we are at 68.06. You can't get much better than that. Now I'm going to show you how many shims I took out. So in order to get, from the total stack of shims, I removed 4 of the larger copper colored washers. So that's what it took to set up that Clutch Masters FX850 twin disc, was just removing 4 of these. So that should get you pretty close, but always measure this. Don't just take my word for it. Okay, so now that we have our hydraulic bearing gap all squared away and everything is set, go ahead and install the bell up onto the block. And this is one of the coolest things about this swap, is it makes it so easy to install trans. If you guys are familiar with V160 and how hard it is to get that trans oriented up into the block and get it to go square, the bell housing being attached separately makes it so fast and so easy to slip the trans onto the clutch. It literally is going to take me about 5 minutes to get this trans up on the jack and slide it into the clutch. Now, one thing that you're going to want to do to prep the trans is to put a little bit of never cease on your splines of your trans, just so it slides on there and it doesn't bind up. So do that, and then you're ready to lift the trans up and in place. Now, one of the other things you're going to want to do is install your clutch lines. So I have my bleeder line installed onto the top fitting, because like I said, you want the fluid pressure to come in and push the air up and out the top. So bleeder line on the top, feed line on the bottom. I'm using one of my clutch line kits here that I sell for this car, since it's a brand new install, since it's an automatic and we're swapping over, I need a new line. So I'm just going to run my braided line kit, and that should be it. I'm going to go ahead and put this trans up and install it. Okay, so you can see our parts pile is getting pretty small, so it's getting pretty exciting. You can see the trans is up and installed. I put all of the 8 bolts that I provided my hardware kit from the actual transmission to the bell. Everything's installed. When you go to install, make sure you watch these lines, and you don't want to pinch them in between the trans and the bell. So just watch those as you slide the trans onto the clutch. But otherwise, that was pretty straightforward. And as you can see, we have trans in place. So I'm going to go ahead and install the cross member now and the prothane mount and get the trans up to where it normally would sit level. And then I'll be back. Okay, so the trans is up and in, the cross member is installed. And one thing to note with the cross member, I always leave all of these bolts hand tight to start, and then I get it all situated wherever I want it. And then I tighten them all down. So that's one thing to keep in mind when you install a cross member. It's probably the easiest part of this whole swap. My cross member is just a simple bolt in, but keeping those bolts loose to start will make it a lot easier for you in the end. But here you can see everything is in place and looking good. So next step is drive shaft and install clutch pedal, bleed the clutch, and put the exhaust back on, and a couple electronic things.